Slowly it rises.
Hey, it's Jason ODB, the Lincoln Addict, back with another video. We're going to take a look at this 1965 Lincoln Continental Convertible. The listing, as you can see here, ends in about 24 hours or less. There's 19 comments, and it's currently at $32,000. So if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. Let's take a dive into this car. We'll talk about what we like, maybe some things to point out, and then a thing or two to consider. Now, this, at the time of recording, is August 14th. And again, there's about a day left on this Bring a Trailer review. Now, I've showed this in the past. This is my little kind of database, if you will, or spreadsheet in this example, where we know in 65 there were 3,356 convertibles produced at a base price of just under $6,800. As I mentioned in the past, that was an increase of only 28 convertibles over the previous year. So pretty much year over year flat in terms of the convertibles. We know the sedan, you can see here, did bump up just under 4,000. So year over year, those numbers were up. There were 50 limos produced. Now, something I'm going to continue to bake into these presentations or reviews is a screenshot that I just took. I'm a Haggerty customer, so I'm able to log in and see what their valuation tool shows. And you can see here upwards of 103 grand all the way down to fair condition. So obviously we'll see where this one falls in between number 4 and number 1. So I'll jump over to Bring a Trailer in a moment, but this is copy and pasted. Basically, we get the chassis number, if you will. It's showing 68,000 miles. You can see it has a lot of the copy-paste normal stuff. It does have a custom radio that we'll talk a little bit about with Kenwood head unit, I believe. And it does have dual exhaust, which these cars had stock, but this has MagnaFlow muffler. So there was some work done underneath the car, which is nice. So a couple things to point out. Number one is some of the purists may not like this. These hubcaps have been polished. Typically, they have a black color painted on them. I prefer, it doesn't matter to me. I don't really have a preference, but I do have a set like this that were polished. I actually like them. The grille has been painted black, so typically that's not the color of it. And from the front three-quarter shot, those are a couple things that we can glean. Maybe a little bit more alignment that could be done on the bumper, but for the most part, I mean, from a front three-quarter shot, black car looks pretty nice. Now, when we look at the VIN plate, unfortunately, what you're going to see here is only the VIN number itself, and we don't have any of the other information. Now, this isn't something to be too considered about. I would say that I have seen plenty of cars where this is the case. It's unfortunate. Now, there is a possibility that you could pop these rivets off and you could look, and sometimes you're able to see the reading on the back side. What the assumption is that this car, we know, was more than likely repainted at some point based upon the paint on the door plate. So we don't really have the insight into some of these other key pieces, including the DSO. Now, I'll be able to assume here in a moment that it is a California car, but, you know, unfortunately, this information, we just don't have it. I have a friend that has a car that's similar to this where it was painted over and you just can't see anything. So it's not always an indicator that someone's trying to hide anything. It's just over the course of time, that's what paint on body shops did. The VIN that we know was also up here. I've broken this information down on the first line before, and we know that this is 36077, so it's the 36,077 out of the 40,230. So what that tells us is it's a late production model for that year. Not a lot to glean there. In some years, if it's an early production, it might have had an option that carried over from the previous year. But if you were certainly looking for a late production of that year, this one's kind of getting towards the tail end of it. Here's some things I like about it. So I'm doing this to try to speed these up a little bit based upon feedback and just kind of my thought process. But 65 is a very desirable year, as I mentioned before. I didn't check this today, but I checked this last week. So give or take about $65,000 to $66,000 for the base price if you convert that into 2023. The color is black. It's very desirable. There's tons of receipts a solid amount of literature and just kind of different things that come with it. I always like that. I think the interiors are nice contrasting color, which we'll jump over to and look at in a moment. The trunk looks great, even with the stereo install in the trunk side. It's an AC car. We'll talk about, is it a California car? I assume that it is. There's a battery disconnect on the negative terminal. It does have new exhaust, as I mentioned. There are a good amount of underneath or undercarriage photos. It appears solid from what I can tell. Of course, there is one area of concern. Doesn't look to be too bad. There is a deck lid receipt that shows in 2001 a new deck lid was purchased. As I've mentioned, typically these cars do and can have challenges with the deck lids based upon the adhesive that was used between the outer and inner skeleton. There are new motor mounts. I say newer style. I meant to just say there's new motor mounts from what I can tell. There are some Baker's Auto receipts from 2001 for relays. The engine was rebuilt in 2004 with Eggy products, so those are really good, solid products. There was a lot of work performed in 2018 up in, I think it was Kirkland, Washington, and then the windows work nicely. They're not slow, which we typically will see slow windows in these cars, and that a lot of times, as John Cashman would preach over the years, had to do with kind of the, quote, peanut butter, as he would describe it, with the grease that kind of just gets old and hardens up. Typically when these cars have had some work done, if the window tracks have been cleaned and re-greased, typically with a newer style grease, then they work much better, and that's what we'll see in these videos. The trunk area, I love seeing all the carpeting, how nice it is. It does have obviously aftermarket custom stereo, and you can see this little panel that they built here. My assumption is that the spare tire is not there based upon this setup, but if these are kind of shallow mount subs, maybe the spare tire is down there. But again, it looks nice. Oftentimes you won't see this. You'll see oftentimes the carpet's gone. What we can see here is, as I mentioned in the past, this tube is indication that it is a California car. It was only required in California, is my understanding. And with some of the receipts and previous registrations, this would indicate to me that this was a California car. Underneath has been kept up pretty well. As I mentioned in the past, with these cars, they do tend to leak, and I think that overall it looks pretty good underneath. Now, I'll talk about my concerns here in just a moment, but let's take a look at the contrasting interior. I think contrasting with the black, it's a good color. Obviously, someone's probably going to want to redo this. And here's another photo of the trunk. Again, your guess is as good as mine. If the spare tire, I would assume, being around car stereo, unless this is elevated enough and it's a shallow mount sub, that maybe the spare tire is not there. Again, not a deal breaker to me, in my opinion. I always just like to kind of know if it is there. And you can see kind of the undercarriage, the normal grit and grime, so to speak. Here is where I get the indication that there were new motor mounts, and the receipts also support that. Now, keep in mind, this isn't a deal breaker, but I want everyone to know there are some cheaper motor mounts that made their way into the market, and Rock Auto sells those, and those motor mounts will degrade very quickly. So my assumption is that these are not those, but just know that if you ever see like the $20 motor mounts out there, those don't last very long. So more than likely they source these. I tried to see it on the receipt. They probably sourced them from a good spot, and you do have to, over the course of 50, 60 years, have these changed. They kind of get sandwiched down pretty good from the grease, grit, grime, and of course the weight of the engine itself. We can see here again, as I pointed out, the new exhaust. That's going to save you, depending on if it's all stainless or whatnot, anywhere from $1,200 to $2,000, in my opinion, depending on where you live and if you know someone that does exhaust work. Those are some of the key things I wanted to call out that I liked. Again, you can see these were polished at some point and the black is removed. You could always have someone pinstripe those, but to me, it'd be easier just to buy a set on eBay. There's plenty enough hubcaps out there. I think I have like 20 different hubcaps. I know I didn't spend a lot of time looking at the overall kind of 3/4 shots, but really if you look at this here, from what I can tell, the paint looks pretty good. The car looks pretty straight. Now these, you could argue and say these are 5 or 10 footer photos, but that's why I always preach it's important to look at these cars, or if you're looking to purchase something, certainly go look at it in person, maybe have someone that's more qualified look at it, if you're not, a quote-unquote car person, so to speak. Now, I'm sure certainly if you looked at all of these photos, I mean, you and I would probably say, hey, the paint is not perfect, but I've told many of my friends in the past that, a black painted car is certainly not easy to maintain, and that's why there's a lot of mobile detailers out there. So I would say, like, on the outside of it, other than maybe some of the gapping for the bumpers, I mean, you could spend a little bit of time. I'm not really sure if these have to be re-chromed. It's kind of hard to tell from these different angles. They look pretty nice, but there's a little bit of stuff here that you see where these could maybe be gapped or adjusted a little bit, but that's getting kind of nitpicky. A lot of times these cars weren't, perfect. A lot of times you have to drop the bumper to be able to get to the bolts back here to adjust these, but certainly not deal breakers there. I want to just see if there's anything else I wanted to call out. The other good thing was there are plenty of videos. So like I always talk about, it's better to have more videos, more photos if possible. But there's a cruise video. There's a cold start. There is a left and right rear auto drop. So fantastic. Those work. Oh, by the way, the windows go up and down really nicely. The top works. The vent windows work. And there's another vent window. There is the other, and I clicked through all of these just so everyone knows I watched them briefly, try to save a little bit of time. And kudos to Bring a Trailer. By them asking and saying, hey, Mr. So-and-so, can you send me a quick video, or can you upload all of this? However they do that, that's fantastic because it helps cut down on those questions that potentially could arise. Now, before we look over at some of the potential challenges or things I noticed, again, I mentioned there's some good amount of literature here that someone's collected over the course of time, and there's a good amount of paperwork, so to speak. So we can see California, so the lineage kind of goes back there. These, I think, were 2001, if you will, for the registrations. You can see the registration card, and sometimes these will show the mileage that helps kind of build the story. Certainly that's what happened in my case, but here I don't think, unless I'm missing it, I don't see that. Plenty of receipts. I've talked about this in the past. This is really key. Even though a lot of these are dated from like 2001, 2002 time period, certainly it helps tell the story of all the work that was done on this car. A lot of stuff was done, including the 430 engine rebuild, a rate of almost 2,600. Eggy products, as I mentioned, those are very good, high-end, awesome products. Your guess is as good as mine if it really needed to be rebuilt. Of course, I always suggest you check the compression on an engine, but oftentimes these engines don't have to be rebuilt, so it could have been just kind of a preventive measure. But certainly a rebuilt engine is a win-win. It's been in the car 20 years. People have been enjoying it and putting some miles on it. Now, if we jump back over here and we look at some of the key callouts that I noticed, I'm not a huge fan of the stereo head unit, how it's installed. We'll look at that. Again, the trunk area, to me, the stereo is very subtle. If you did not like that, that's easily removable from the trunk stereo standpoint. The seats, we'll talk about, they're missing the 65 emblems, which leads me to believe that the seats were redone at some point. Not a deal breaker. It just might be something that that you may want to add if you ever redo the seats. The car does need that bar installed between the rear bracketry and the trunk. John Cashman preached this, as others did as well. There's a video on my channel how to do that. Remember, that's 64, 65 only. It does have a 2-port fuel pump. Remember what I always say, if it's not broke, don't fix it. However, a 3-port fuel pump is preferred. You can get those from kind of what we refer to as the usual suspects. The fan is not correct, so we'll take a look at that. Rest easy knowing that, hey, by the way, the fan on my 65 also needs to be changed out, so that's an easy fix. It also does not have a clutch fan, so I've got to do that myself. The single master cylinder, or as some people will refer to as the single pot, I would suggest upgrading that to a dual. I hate when the VIN door plate is either scraped, or it's painted over. Again, I've already mentioned that. There's nothing we can do there. The grill is painted black. That's easily remedied for whatever reason, if you want to change that out. You could probably just buy another grill probably from the usual suspects. Again, we'll look at it here. You may like it. It kind of blends in, but that pot metal original grill kind of has more of that stainless, I don't want to say chrome, kind of a stainless brushed finish, typically on a driver is the way that it will appear or look. If we take a look at, although I've been around stereo a long time, in these old cars, I'm a big proponent of not doing things like this. It's convenient, sure. But as technology has advanced, you can easily put, like what I've done is, I don't even have a head unit, have a little Bluetooth guy that plugs directly into your amp, and then your Bluetooth on your Android or iPhone syncs up to that little device, and it plays music right into the amp, right out to your highs or your subs. So really this in 2023 is unnecessary. My assumption it was done early 2000s. Hopefully the ashtray behind it or that area comes with it. If it doesn't, you'd have to source that and maybe dye it or get the same color. I would take this out and either relocate this into the glove box, or I would just do what I mentioned. Really, again, it's unnecessary. Most of us are streaming music or playing music off of our phone. I don't see many people riding around with a CD case these days. Although I love the 90s, there's really almost no need for it. If we look at right here, the little emblems are missing. I do have a gentleman that makes custom emblems for me that look exactly like the original. So if you ever needed those for your car, the original ones can tend to get a little bit nasty over time, but typically they can be re-chromed and they're fine. But my assumption is that whoever had the interior redone at said point just didn't want them, or they were lost and misplaced, which has driven up the price of those original emblems. Keeping with the stereo, again, although I've been around custom cars and custom stereo a long time, these speaker pods may not look too bad. You can always either remove this, or you can, a lot of these highs, you can take these little speaker grills, if you will, off, and you could run without them, or you could end up, buying another less subtle speaker grill. This is kind of more like kind of 2000s, if you will. And I don't know, it's just not my style for now. The front also has, I think the front and rear has the speaker pods. And again, the pod itself doesn't really, cause me any anguish. I would just maybe modernize it a little bit by taking off the grill or changing the grill out. If we look at the engine bay, we can see it is an AC car, although he's been very clear the AC does not work. The belt, in fact, I don't even think is on. The fan itself needs to really go back to the 5-blade with a fan clutch. Being that it's an AC car, you would have had the shroud, you would have had the 5-blade fan, and there would have been a fan clutch. And again, not hating on it, because my 65 also has this same non-clutch fan on it. And my car runs great, even with the AC on. But certainly, it's kind of a cheap fix to be able to go back to the factory. Let me just jump over here and see if there's anything. I mentioned the single reservoir. We looked at the door plate earlier. And if we look at the trunk, which I do like the subtle stereo setup in the trunk, as I mentioned, I will point out the one item, and I hate scrolling back and forth here, so my apologies. So if we look here, the amp and stuff was mounted up here. There's that bracket that you can spend about 20-30 minutes on, and you can cut down the little bar. There's a video on my channel, and you can put the piece, and it needs to run from this side to this side on these little kind of nubs right here. And that'll ensure that there's never flexing. You don't want these little pieces to break. And as John has reinforced to me, that was quote unquote an engineering defect that they remedied by the time they got the 66. That's why you see that big bar welded in 66 and 67, because it was kind of already fixed. The last thing I will say as I wrap this video up, I appreciate all the support. Things to consider is more than likely the amp gauge needs to be rebuilt or bypassed. I've talked to you guys about 64, 65. The amp gauge really needs to be rebuilt or bypassed, so you could take it out and have someone like Blair Farmer rebuild it. If you're not kind of a car person or someone to kind of go and do that type of work, it takes a little bit to take the stuff apart and get the amp gauge out, but certainly it can be a fire hazard. It might be fine, but certainly I would suggest taking it out. You can either bypass it altogether or you can send it out. There's a couple guys that do it, including Blair Farmer, and they'll bypass it to ensure that this will never be a fire hazard. So that's one thing to consider. I certainly appreciate the support. Leave a comment, even if it's a thumbs up. And thank you on behalf of the Lincoln Addict. I'm trying to speed these up a little bit, keeping them entertaining, but also beneficial if you're looking to buy a car now or maybe in the future. Thank you so much for the support. Stay on the rise. Take care.